Alexander Sterling moved through the lofty corridors of Sterling Global like a ghost. A formidable presence felt more than seen. His empire, a monolithic testament to his unyielding will, stretched across continents, its tendrils reaching into every conceivable industry. As CEO, Alexander was a titan, a man whose ambition was as boundless as the concrete and glass edifice that housed his headquarters. His life was a meticulously orchestrated symphony of deals, deadlines, and dominance, utterly devoid of the messy, unpredictable notes of human connection. The sterile opulence of his penthouse office, with its panoramic views of the city lights shimmering like fallen stars, mirrored the meticulous order of his existence, yet offered no warmth. He was a workaholic, a machine, fueled by an insatiable drive that left no room for vulnerability. Whispers of his ruthlessness echoed through boardrooms, but none dared question his unparalleled success. Behind the polished facade, however, lay an unspoken history, a shadow that stretched back to a traumatic event in his youth. It was a wound that had never truly healed, instead festering into the relentless ambition that defined him. The memory was a cold, sharp shard, buried deep but ever present, a constant reminder of loss and the desperate need for control. This past, a silent architect of his present, was the bedrock of his isolation, ensuring that no one ever truly got close enough to see the cracks in his perfectly constructed world. The Sterling Global skyscraper itself was a symbol of his power and isolation. It pierced the sky, a beacon of corporate might, yet within its vast, impersonal embrace, individuals often felt swallowed whole. Elevators whisked executives to lofty heights, while countless others toiled in its lower echelons, their lives intersecting with Alexander's only as cogs in his grand design. Far below the executive floors, a new presence had quietly entered this meticulously ordered world. Eleanor. She was a night-cleaning lady, a silhouette against the fluorescent glow of deserted offices, her existence a stark contrast to the grandeur around her. Elena moved with a quiet efficiency, her hands calloused by years of relentless effort, her spirit weighed down by the constant struggle to make ends meet. Every swipe of her cloth, every sweep of her broom, was a testament to her unwavering determination to provide for her unseen battles outside these walls. She was a woman etched with the lines of worry, yet possessed a quiet dignity that shone through her worn uniform. Her presence was almost ethereal, a diligent phantom in the quiet hours when the city slept. Eleanor's quiet, diligent nature was a stark contrast to the building's imposing grandeur, a subtle rebellion against the impersonal machinery of corporate life. She possessed a hidden resilience, an inner spirit that flickered despite the relentless demands of her life. It was a strength born of necessity, a quiet defiance against circumstances that threatened to overwhelm her. Alexander's late-night work habit was legendary. It was not uncommon for him to be the last one in the building, the solitary king in his glass castle. On this particular night, the city hummed its nocturnal symphony as he finally decided to retire, the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing on his mind. He walked through the hushed executive floor, his footsteps echoing in the silence, heading towards the private executive washroom. The scent of sterile cleaning products hung faintly in the air, a familiar scent of the building's nocturnal transformation. As he pushed open the heavy oak door, the fluorescent light of the washroom spilled into the corridor. And there she was. Curled on the floor beside a row of gleaming porcelain, her head resting awkwardly against the cold ceramic of a toilet, was Elena. Her cleaning cart stood sentinel nearby, a silent witness to her profound exhaustion. She was fast asleep, her breathing shallow, the lines of worry on her face softened by unconsciousness. Alexander's initial reaction was a surge of annoyance, a flicker of irritation at this unexpected disruption to his perfectly ordered world. How dare an employee be found in such a state, in such a place? It was unprofessional, a breach of the unspoken rules of his empire. But then, as he stood there, observing her, something unreadable flickered in his cold, analytical eyes. It wasn't pity, not exactly, but a momentary pause in his relentless self-absorption. He noticed the faint, dark circles beneath her eyes, the way her hair clung damply to her forehead, the utter weariness etched into her posture. It was more than just a cleaning lady sleeping on the job. It was a human being at the absolute limit of her endurance. The mystery of why she was sleeping there, not just as part of her job, but as a desperate measure, began to subtly stir within him. What would Alexander do to the sleeping cleaning lady? The answer, at this moment, remained suspended in the quiet, sterile air. Alexander Sterling stood over the sleeping figure of Elena, his mind a battlefield of conflicting impulses. The CEO, known for his ruthless efficiency, felt an unfamiliar snag in his meticulously ordered thoughts. His first knee-jerk reaction was to fire her, to eliminate the anomaly, to restore the pristine order of Sterling Global. But as his gaze lingered on her tired face, the worn fabric of her uniform, and the almost childlike vulnerability of her slumber, another thought, faint yet persistent, began to surface. It wasn't pity, not in its conventional sense, but a peculiar curiosity, a chink in the armor of his habitual detachment. He found himself dissecting the scene, not as a problem to be solved with a dismissal slip, but as a puzzle. He observed Elena with an intensity usually reserved for market analyses. The dark circles under her eyes were not mere smudges. They were deep, purplish valleys of exhaustion. Her hands, even in repose, were slightly curled, the knuckles enlarged, bearing the unmistakable marks of relentless physical labor. The cheap, synthetic fabric of her uniform was stretched thin at the elbows, in testament to countless rotations in industrial washing machines. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her body, a shiver that hinted at a deeper chill than the sterile air of the executive washroom. He noticed a small, almost imperceptible scar above her left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection that somehow humanized her in a way his employees rarely were. This was not just a cleaning lady. This was a person pushed to the brink. A fleeting image, unbidden and unwelcome, flickered through Alexander's mind. A younger version of himself, hunched over textbooks in a dimly lit rented room, the gnawing emptiness in his stomach a constant companion to his ambition. The memory was sharp, vivid, and carried with it the ghost of a loneliness he had long since buried under layers of success and power. He had known desperation, though of a different kind, and that fleeting resonance, however faint, stayed his hand. Eleanor stirred, a soft groan escaping her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, disoriented, before snapping wide with terror as they landed on Alexander's imposing figure. Her breath caught in her throat, a small, choked sound. She scrambled backwards, her movements clumsy from sleep and fear, bumping against the cold porcelain. Her face, moments ago softened by slumber, was now a mask of pure dread. She knew, with chilling certainty, what this meant: dismissal, loss of her meager income, the precipice of an even deeper abyss. "Sir? Mr. Sterling?" she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. I can explain. It won't happen again. Please, I need this job. My circumstances are difficult. I don't know what happened. I'm so sorry." Her words tumbled out, a desperate, disjointed plea, revealing a raw glimpse into her dire circumstances without fully articulating them. She braced herself for the inevitable, the cold, clinical pronouncement of her termination. But Alexander's response was not what she expected. His voice, usually a sharp instrument of command, was quiet, almost contemplative. "Why here, Elena?" he asked, his tone devoid of accusation, laced instead with a quiet, probing curiosity that completely disarmed her. "Why not the staff lounge, or your car?" Eleanor blinked, her fear slowly morphing into cautious surprise. The question was so unexpected, so utterly unlike the dismissal she had anticipated. "There is no staff lounge this late, sir," she replied, her voice still trembling. "And I don't have a car. My bus schedule, it's complicated. I just needed a moment, a few minutes to rest my eyes before the next shift started across town." Her explanation was halting, laced with shame, exposing the vast social divide between them with every word. Alexander simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. He processed her words, not with judgment, but with an almost scientific detachment. His mind, ever the strategist, began to formulate an alternative. Firing her solved nothing. It merely displaced a problem. Keeping her, however, presented an opportunity, a data point he hadn't considered. He saw the potential for more, for something beyond the simple transaction of labor for wages. "I can offer you more work," Alexander stated, his voice regaining a hint of its usual authority. Eleanor's head snapped up, a flicker of bewildered hope in her eyes. "My private office," he continued, gesturing vaguely towards the upper echelons of the building. "It requires a deeper clean, more frequent attention than the general executive areas. Are you capable of handling that?" Elena, still reeling from the unexpected reprieve, nodded vigorously, almost frantically. "Yes, sir, absolutely, I can, I will, thank you." Her gratitude was palpable, thick in the air. She knew this was a lifeline, a chance she couldn't afford to squander. Yet, beneath the relief, a sense of unease lingered. His offer felt too generous, almost too easy. There was an unspoken condition, a silent understanding that hung between them, though she couldn't quite grasp its nature. Alexander reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek, metallic keycard. He held it out to her, the small rectangle glinting under the harsh fluorescent light. "This," he said, his voice low, "will give you access to my private office. You will be responsible for its cleanliness, and yours alone, every night. Consider it a trial. Do not disappoint me, Elena." He paused, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "And do not sleep on the job again, not in my office." Elena took the card, her fingers brushing against his, a fleeting, almost imperceptible contact that sent a jolt through her. It was heavy, cold, a symbol of a trust she hadn't earned, a privilege she hadn't dared to dream of. She clutched it tightly, her mind racing. Access to his private office, the inner sanctum of Sterling Global. The revelation hung in the air, a silent promise of both opportunity and an unknown future. With the cold, metallic keycard now a tangible weight in her palm, Elena embarked on her new, solitary duty. Each night, as the city lights twinkled outside the towering windows of Sterling Global, she would ascend to Alexander Sterling's private office. It was a space that whispered of immense power and meticulous order, a stark contrast to the worn-out life she led outside its polished doors. The office itself was a cavern of understated luxury, a testament to Alexander's formidable taste and unwavering focus. Dark, polished wood gleamed under recessed lighting, and panoramic windows offered a breathtaking, yet somewhat isolating view of the urban sprawl below. Her initial cleanings were performed with an almost surgical precision, driven by a deep-seated fear of disappointing Alexander and losing this unexpected lifeline. She dusted every surface, polished every pane of glass, and vacuumed the plush carpet until it bore the rhythmic stripes of her effort. But as the nights bled into weeks, a subtle shift occurred. The fear began to recede, replaced by a quiet curiosity. She found herself observing, not just cleaning. On a large, imposing desk, often cleared of clutter by day, she noticed a small, framed photograph, discreetly tucked beneath a stack of financial reports. It was faded, the colors softened by time, depicting a younger Alexander, perhaps in his late teens, with a woman whose smile was both gentle and strong. Elena couldn't help but wonder about the story behind the image, a fleeting glimpse into a past Alexander rarely, if ever, acknowledged. Near the photo, a well-worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius lay open, its pages dog-eared and marked. It surprised her. The ruthless CEO she had encountered seemed ill-suited to ancient philosophy. These small, intimate details painted a picture of a man far more complex than the stoic, unyielding facade he presented to the world. Alexander, for his part, was subtly aware of Elena's nocturnal presence. He found himself unconsciously adjusting his routine. He'd arrive earlier, or stay later, his mind often drifting to the quiet woman who moved through his sanctum when he was absent. He began to leave things out. Not as tests, but almost as breadcrumbs. A new book on a side table, a half-finished crossword puzzle, a single perfectly brewed cup of cold coffee, sometimes still steamy in the morning. He observed the subtle changes, the way she organized his pens, or the fresh, almost imperceptible scent of lavender that now clung to the air in his office after she had gone. These were not the actions of a man indifferent to his surroundings. They were the quiet acknowledgments of a presence that had begun to intrigue him. One evening, as Eleanor was meticulously wiping down a bookshelf, she heard the distant ping of an elevator. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was past her usual departure time. Alexander was not supposed to be there. She froze, a mop still in her hand, feeling an irrational surge of panic. The elevator doors slid open on her floor, and there he stood, his silhouette tall and imposing against the brightly lit corridor. He looked surprised, perhaps even a little caught off guard, to find her still there. Their eyes met across the vast expanse of the silent office. There was no accusation in his gaze, only a moment of shared unexpected recognition. Eleanor, usually so deferential, found her voice. "Good evening, sir," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I was just finishing up." Alexander simply nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his head. "Good evening, Elena," he replied, his voice calm, devoid of the earlier probing curiosity. He walked past her, heading towards his desk, leaving her to finish her task. The encounter was brief, almost trivial, yet it felt significant. It was a crack in the carefully constructed barrier between them, a shared moment of humanity in the sterile environment of the corporate world. Elena noticed his lingering gaze as he sat down, flicking through some papers. It wasn't a stare of judgment, but rather one of quiet observation, as if he were trying to decipher a complex equation. A few nights later, Alexander found a small, crumpled piece of paper tucked beneath his desk blotter. It was a child's drawing, rendered in vibrant, enthusiastic crayon. A stick-figure family stood beneath a bright yellow sun, surrounded by a riot of colorful, abstract shapes. One figure, smaller than the rest, had an oversized head and an exaggerated smile. Eleanor must have accidentally dropped it. A wave of something unfamiliar washed over Alexander, a mix of sentimentality and intrigue. The drawing was undeniably hers, a stark, innocent contrast to the cold, calculating world he inhabited. His curiosity, already piqued by her quiet diligence and the glimpse into her personal struggles, now intensified. The drawing was a tangible clue, a fragment of a life he knew nothing about. He found himself spending an unusual amount of time examining the drawing, tracing the crude lines with his finger. Who was this child? Why was Elena carrying such a precious, yet fragile, memento? That night, Alexander made a call, a discreet inquiry to his head of security. He requested a background check on Elena, not with suspicion, but with a growing, almost obsessive need to understand. He wanted to know more about the woman who silently entered his world each night, leaving behind not just a clean office, but a faint, lingering scent of lavender and the silent question of her untold story. He needed to understand the hidden depths of her life, the reasons for her quiet dignity despite her humble position. The results of the investigation arrived 2 days later, delivered in a sealed envelope to his private office. As Alexander read through the report, his practiced, analytical mind processed the information. Elena had a child, a young daughter, facing significant medical challenges. The words on the page laid bare a reality far harsher than he could have imagined, a truth that resonated with an unfamiliar ache deep within his own guarded heart. Alexander's investigation had unveiled a tragic tapestry woven with threads of hardship and relentless struggle. The reports detailed Elena's life with stark, impersonal efficiency, yet the words painted a vivid picture of a woman besieged by misfortune. Her young daughter, Sophia, suffered from a rare neurological condition demanding constant medical attention and specialized treatments that far exceeded Elena's meager cleaning lady salary. The medical debt, a monstrous, ever-growing entity, loomed over her like a dark cloud, while her partner, Sophia's father, had vanished years ago, leaving Elena to face the storm alone. The cold, hard facts on the page resonated with an unfamiliar ache within Alexander, a poignant echo of his own past, of wounds he had long believed were fully cauterized. He found himself dwelling on Elena's plight with an intensity that surprised him. His usual detachment, a shield he had perfected over decades, began to fray at the edges. He saw in Elena's desperate fight for her child a reflection of a vulnerability he had once known, a raw, primal fear that transcended wealth and status. It was a feeling that stirred something deep inside him, a dormant empathy he hadn't realized still existed. Eleanor, oblivious to the meticulous scrutiny of her life, continued her work with the same quiet diligence. Each night, she moved through the Sterling Global offices, a phantom figure in the vast, silent corridors. Her desperation, however, was a growing internal tremor, a silent scream that threatened to shatter her composure. The medical bills piled up, each one a fresh assault on her already fragile hope. Sophia's condition, while stable, required expensive medications and therapies that were constantly at risk of being cut off. The weight of her secrets, the crushing burden of her responsibilities, etched new lines of exhaustion around her eyes. One evening, Alexander, driven by an impulse he couldn't quite articulate, made a small, intentional gesture. As he left his office, he placed a discreetly expensive coffee cup, still warm, on a corner of his desk, knowing Elena would find it. It was a subtle deviation from his usual routine, a tiny offering in the grand scheme of her struggles. Elena discovered it during her rounds, her brows furrowing in confusion. A fleeting thought that it might be a mistake, a forgotten item, crossed her mind. But the coffee was fresh, the cup pristine. She hesitated for a moment. Then, with a quiet appreciation that she allowed herself only in the solitude of the empty office, she took a sip. The warmth spread through her, a small, unexpected comfort in the vast, cold building. She still maintained her professional distance, but a tiny seed of curiosity about her enigmatic boss had been planted. Alexander, meanwhile, grappled with his own internal turmoil. Elena's story had unearthed fragments of his past trauma, of a time when he too had felt powerless, watching helplessly as a loved one slipped away. The parallels were unsettling, forcing him to confront emotions he had meticulously buried beneath layers of ambition and corporate success. His internal debate raged: should he interfere, offer assistance that would inevitably cross professional boundaries? Or should he maintain his detached facade, the cold, calculating CEO he had become? The thought of Elena facing her battles alone, however, gnawed at him, a persistent, uncomfortable sensation. Just as Alexander wrestled with his conscience, a critical incident unfolded in Elena's life. One particularly bleak night, as she prepared for her shift, Sophia's condition worsened dramatically. A sudden, terrifying seizure racked the child's small body, sending Elena into a panic. The frantic rush to the emergency room, the agonizing wait, the doctor's grim faces. It was a nightmare she had lived before, but this time it felt more desperate, more precarious. She was forced to miss work, unable to even call in, her mind consumed by the terrifying reality unfolding before her eyes. Missing a shift meant risking her job, her only source of income, and with it, Sophia's last lifeline. The thought was a bitter metallic taste in her mouth. The next morning, Alexander arrived at Sterling Global to find Elena's absence noted in the security log. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that something was terribly wrong. His earlier investigation into her life, the details of Sophia's fragile health, flooded his mind. He made a series of urgent calls, bypassing usual protocols, demanding information from the hospital where Sophia was usually treated. What he learned confirmed his deepest fears. Sophia had been admitted in critical condition. Without a moment's hesitation, shedding his CEO persona like an unwanted skin, Alexander made his way to the hospital. He found Elena in the sterile waiting room, her face pale and streaked with tears, a picture of utter despair. His presence, unexpected and jarring in such a vulnerable setting, caused her to look up, her eyes wide with shock. He stood there, a towering figure in his expensive suit, a beacon of improbable hope in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor, a silent question hanging in the air. What would he do now? Alexander's towering presence at the hospital, a stark contrast to the muted despair of the waiting room, sent a jolt through Elena. Her initial shock quickly gave way to a surge of fear, a primal instinct that he had come to deliver the final blow, her dismissal. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, darted from his perfectly tailored suit to his unreadable expression. He looked out of place, a wolf in a sheep's pen, yet there was an undeniable gravity in his stillness. He didn't speak immediately, allowing the heavy silence to stretch, amplifying Elena's anxiety. Then, his voice, usually sharp and commanding, softened to an almost imperceptible murmur. He wasn't there to scold or condemn. He was there to help. He spoke of Sophia, of the critical condition she was in, and then, without preamble, offered a solution. He would cover all medical costs, arrange for the best specialists, ensure Sophia received every possible chance at recovery. Elena listened, her mind struggling to process his words. It was too much, too sudden, too generous. Her initial distrust, honed by a lifetime of hardship and disappointment, immediately flared. Pride, a stubborn companion in her poverty, warred with the overwhelming desperate need to save her child. She tried to refuse, mumbling something about her dignity, her ability to manage, but her voice was weak, barely a whisper against the roaring fear in her heart. She was drowning, and he was offering a lifeline, albeit one she hadn't asked for and couldn't comprehend. It was then that Alexander, sensing her internal struggle, pushed past his own carefully constructed barriers. He revealed a small, almost imperceptible crack in his formidable armor. He spoke not of business or power, but of a time in his own past. A loss that had shaped him, a pain that had never truly healed. He didn't elaborate, didn't offer details that would expose too much, but the raw emotion in his eyes, a mirroring of her own grief, was unmistakable. He shared the vulnerability of having felt utterly helpless, of watching someone he cherished suffer and being unable to prevent it. This unexpected admission, this shared humanity, created an unspoken bridge between them, spanning the vast chasm of their social and economic differences. Elena looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time saw not just the ruthless CEO, but a man who understood a profound, debilitating kind of sorrow. In that raw, emotional conversation, Eleanor, emboldened by his surprising openness, found herself revealing the full, crushing extent of her struggles. She spoke of Sophia's rare condition, the endless rounds of hospitals, the mounting debts that had stripped her of everything, even hope. She recounted the agonizing choices she had been forced to make, the sacrifices, the constant gnawing fear that she was failing her child. Her voice cracked with unexpressed grief and exhaustion, tears streaming down her face as she laid bare the deepest wounds of her existence. Alexander listened, his expression unmoving, but a flicker in his eyes betrayed the profound impact of her words. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes, just absorbed the weight of her pain, offering the rare gift of truly being heard. Days turned into a blur of medical consultations, specialist visits, and hopeful, albeit cautious, reports. Alexander moved with precision and efficiency, cutting through bureaucratic red tape, leveraging his vast network to secure Sophia the best possible care. He arranged for a private room, a dedicated team of nurses, and consultations with world-renowned pediatricians. Elena watched in stunned gratitude as Sophia's condition, slowly but steadily, began to improve. The child's improving health brought a glimmer of hope, a fragile bloom in the barren landscape of Elena's life. With each positive update, a wave of profound gratitude washed over her, slowly eroding her initial distrust and pride. She began to see a different side of the ruthless CEO, a man capable of astonishing compassion, a man who had, without question, become their unexpected savior. Alexander, in turn, found himself drawn into Elena's world, a world so far removed from his own sterile existence. The vulnerability he had dared to show, the shared moments of anxiety and relief had forged an unexpected connection. He found a purpose beyond profit margins and corporate acquisitions, a profound sense of connection he never knew he craved. The sterile hospital corridors, once symbols of despair, now held a strange warmth, a quiet camaraderie. He spent hours by Sophia's bedside, observing Elena's gentle care, the quiet strength that radiated from her even in her deepest exhaustion. He saw her smile, a rare, radiant thing, when Sophia's fever finally broke, and he felt an unfamiliar lightness in his own chest. As Sophia's recovery progressed, A delicate equilibrium settled between Alexander and Elena. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a cautious understanding. Eleanor, though still guarded, allowed herself to lean just a little on the strength he offered. Alexander, for his part, found himself anticipating their quiet conversations, the small moments of shared humanity that had become an unexpected balm to his solitary soul. He had walked into the hospital a rescuer, but he was leaving, slowly but surely, a changed man. One afternoon, as Alexander was leaving Sophia's room, a figure stood observing him from the end of the corridor. It was a woman, impeccably dressed, her face partially obscured by the shadow of a large, expensive hat. Her gaze, however, was sharp, almost predatory, fixated on Alexander with an intensity that suggested a history, a past connection. She watched him interact with Elena, a delicate smile playing on her lips, a smile that held no warmth, only a cold, calculating assessment. Alexander, engrossed in a quiet exchange with Elena about Sophia's latest progress, remained oblivious to the mysterious figure. The woman lingered for a few more moments, her eyes flicking from Alexander to Elena, then to the improving child, before she turned and disappeared around the corner, leaving behind only a faint scent of expensive perfume and a chilling sense of foreboding. The subtle shift in Alexander's priorities became increasingly evident. His formerly rigid schedule, once dictated solely by the relentless demands of Sterling Global, now frequently bent to accommodate visits to Sophia, quiet conversations with Elena, and even moments of shared, comfortable silence by the child's bedside. He found himself dedicating more time, not just resources, to Elena and her daughter, a commitment that began to subtly, almost imperceptibly, loosen the tight reins he held on certain aspects of his colossal business empire. Board meetings were occasionally rescheduled. Urgent calls were sometimes delayed. It was a deviation from his established pattern, a crack in the meticulously constructed facade of the unyielding CEO that did not go unnoticed. Whispers began to circulate through the polished halls of Sterling Global. Initially, they were vague, hushed murmurs about Alexander's unusual absences, his distracted demeanor. But as his visits to the hospital grew more frequent, and as he was occasionally spotted with Elena, the cleaning lady, the whispers coalesced into more defined rumors. Speculation ran rampant, fueled by envy, curiosity, and the inherent human desire to dissect the private lives of the powerful. Some posited a charitable endeavor, others a fleeting infatuation, but all agreed Alexander Sterling was changing, and the catalyst seemed to be this unassuming woman. Among those who observed this transformation with a particularly keen and calculating eye was the mysterious woman from the hospital corridor. Her name was Victoria Thorne, a former business associate and, for a brief, intense period years ago, Alexander's fiancée. Their engagement had ended abruptly, shattered by a betrayal Alexander could never quite forgive, a betrayal that had hardened his heart and sculpted the ruthless persona he presented to the world. Victoria, however, had never truly let go, her ambition intertwined with a deep-seated resentment and a proprietary claim over Alexander's past and future. She saw Eleanor not as a potential partner for Alexander, but as an interloper, a threat to her own carefully laid plans for reclaiming her place by his side, or failing that, ensuring his downfall. Alexander, unaware of the shadow that loomed, was grappling with a different kind of internal struggle. The vulnerability he had displayed at the hospital, the shared pain with Elena, had inadvertently unlocked long-buried memories. Flashbacks, sharp and painful, pierced his guarded mind. He saw his younger self, full of naive trust, offering his heart and his burgeoning company to Victoria, only to have both ruthlessly exploited. He remembered the cold calculation in her eyes as she orchestrated a corporate maneuver that almost cost him everything. A betrayal so profound it had convinced him that genuine connection was a weakness, an open wound for others to exploit. He had built his empire on the ashes of that trust, fortifying himself against any future emotional attachments. Yet, with Elena, those walls were crumbling, brick by painful brick. Elena, too, found herself in a complicated emotional landscape. Alexander's generosity, His unwavering support for Sophia was overwhelming. But as Sophia's health continued to improve, and as Alexander's presence became a constant, comforting fixture in their lives, a subtle guilt began to gnaw at her. She was a woman of fierce independence, accustomed to earning every penny, fighting every battle on her own. The sheer magnitude of Alexander's assistance, while undeniably life-saving, felt like charity, and her pride bristled at the notion. She wanted to contribute, to earn her way, to somehow reciprocate the immense kindness he had shown. This burgeoning sense of indebtedness, however, was slowly twisting into a seed of unease, feeling that perhaps her gratitude was being taken for granted, or worse, that Alexander's motives were not as pure as they seemed. Alexander, for his part, struggled with his burgeoning feelings for Elena. The affection was undeniable, a warmth he hadn't felt in years, but it was battling fiercely against his ingrained, guarded nature. He had spent decades perfecting the art of emotional detachment, and this new, potent connection with Elena threatened to dismantle everything he had built. He found himself torn between the desire to embrace this unfamiliar happiness and the deep-seated fear of history repeating itself, of another betrayal leaving him shattered. It was during this delicate dance of burgeoning emotions and lingering anxieties that Victoria Thorne made her subtle move. She began to plant seeds of doubt, not directly with Elena, but through carefully orchestrated whispers and seemingly innocent comments overheard by others. These fragments of conversation, always just out of Alexander's immediate hearing, painted a picture of him as a man whose generosity was always transactional, whose kindness always came with a hidden agenda. She implied that his interest in Elena was merely a new project, a distraction, or perhaps even a calculated PR move to soften his image. One evening, Eleanor, still working diligently as a cleaning lady, albeit with a new sense of purpose and gratitude, was tidying Alexander's office. She had stayed later than usual, lost in thought about her future, about Sophia, and about the perplexing, powerful man who had entered their lives. As she meticulously dusted the executive desk, she overheard a hushed conversation from the adjacent, partially open door of Alexander's personal assistant's office. The assistant was speaking on the phone, her voice low but clear in the silent office. "Yes," the assistant murmured. "Mr. Sterling is very invested in the Elena project. It certainly boosted his public perception, and the board seems quite pleased with the, humanitarian angle." The words hung in the air, cold and stark, echoing in Elena's ears. The Elena project, humanitarian angle. A cold dread settled in her stomach. The phrase implied calculation, a strategic maneuver, not genuine compassion. The revelation hit her like a physical blow, implying that Alexander's motives might not be entirely altruistic, that her family's suffering might have been, in some twisted way, exploited for his own gain. Her heart, which had just begun to open, slammed shut with a sickening thud. Eleanor stood frozen, the cleaning cloth clutched in her hand, the words "Elena Project" reverberating in the quiet cavern of Alexander's office. The polished surfaces around her suddenly seemed to mock her, reflecting a distorted image of her own naive hope. A bitter taste filled her mouth, a cruel concoction of disbelief and betrayal. She had dared to believe, dared to let down her guard, only to have her deepest fears confirmed by a casual, corporate turn of phrase. The warmth she had felt for Alexander, the nascent trust she had carefully nurtured, evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a chilling void. How could she have been so blind, so foolish? Her mind raced, replaying every kind gesture, every compassionate word, now reinterpreting them through this new, cynical lens. Was it all a performance? A calculated act to improve his public image, to appease his board? The thought was a searing brand on her soul. Unaware of the devastating impact his assistant's unwitting words had on Elena, Alexander continued to pursue their burgeoning connection with an intensity that surprised even himself. He found himself thinking of Elena constantly, her quiet strength, her unwavering devotion to Sophia, the way her eyes held a depth of emotion he rarely encountered. He sent thoughtful gifts to the hospital, arranged for specialized therapists, and even began to rearrange his demanding schedule to spend more time with Sophia, ostensibly for Elena's sake, but increasingly for his own. He saw it as nurturing a fragile, precious bond, a connection that promised a future far brighter than his solitary past. He was oblivious to the subtle shifts in Elena's demeanor, the almost imperceptible withdrawal that began to manifest in her guarded glances and increasingly polite, yet distant, responses. Meanwhile, Victoria Thorne, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her cunning, watched from the shadows, her plan unfolding with meticulous precision. She had been Alexander's fiancée years ago, before a devastating personal tragedy ripped them apart, leaving her feeling discarded and replaced. Her bitterness had festered, transforming into a potent desire for revenge. She hadn't planted the seed of doubt directly. Instead, she had cultivated a network of seemingly innocuous gossip, strategically placing half-truths and insidious implications where they would be most effective. She used her lingering connections within Sterling Global, whispering to former colleagues and carefully selected acquaintances, painting Alexander as a man who always had an ulterior motive, a master manipulator who could turn any situation to his advantage. She knew Alexander's past vulnerabilities, his deep-seated fear of being used, and she expertly played on these, twisting his genuine concern for Elena into something sinister. Elena's withdrawal became more pronounced with each passing day. The Elena project echoed in her mind, tainting every interaction, every shared glance. She began to see Alexander's generosity not as kindness, but as a calculated investment. His attentive questions about Sophia's health felt like data collection, his comforting presence by her bedside, a staged photo opportunity. She started to avoid his calls, offering flimsy excuses, and her once diligent presence in his office became sporadic and hurried. The emotional chasm between them widened, unnoticed by Alexander, who attributed her distance to stress and exhaustion. The inevitable confrontation erupted one evening in the opulent executive lounge, a space usually reserved for hushed power dealings. Alexander, frustrated by Elena's evasiveness and sensing a profound shift in her, finally cornered her. "Elena," he began, his voice laced with concern, "you've been avoiding me. Is something wrong? Is it Sophia? Is there anything I can do?" Elena flinched at the sound of Sophia's name, feeling a fresh wave of resentment. She looked at him, her eyes hardened, a stark contrast to the grateful gaze he was accustomed to. "There's nothing you need to do, Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice clipped, formal. "My daughter is recovering and I can handle things from here." Alexander's brow furrowed. "Mr. Sterling? Eleanor? What is this? We've moved past that, haven't we? What's going on?" His confusion was genuine, his hurt palpable, but Elena saw only a skilled actor playing his part to perfection. "I think you know exactly what's going on," she said, her voice rising slightly, betraying the tremor in her heart. "I'm not a project, Alexander. My daughter's illness isn't a PR opportunity for you to exploit." The words hung in the air, sharp and accusatory, striking Alexander with the force of a physical blow. His face went pale, his eyes widening in shock and disbelief. "A project? PR opportunity? What are you talking about, Elena?" he stammered, completely bewildered. "How could you even think such a thing?" Their argument escalated, fueled by Elena's unspoken accusations and Alexander's genuine confusion and wounded pride. He tried to explain, to understand, but Elena was too consumed by her pain and the cold, cynical interpretation of his actions. She saw his attempts at explanation as further manipulation, his hurt expression as a carefully crafted facade. The trust that had been so painstakingly built crumbled under the weight of Victoria's insidious whispers, and the misinterpretation of an innocent, albeit poorly chosen phrase. The raw, unresolved emotions of the moment left them both reeling, a chasm of misunderstanding separating them. As Elena retreated, her heart aching with a fresh wound, she felt a desperate need for tangible proof, something that would unequivocally justify her sudden, brutal distrust. She needed to confirm that her instincts were not just paranoia, but a grounded reality. Driven by this desperate urge, she returned to Alexander's office later that week, her movements stealthy, her conscience warring with her need for truth. She knew it was wrong to snoop, but the image of Sophia, her innocent daughter, being potentially used, spurred her on. Her eyes scanned the meticulously organized desk, the shelves laden with awards and thick financial reports, and then, tucked beneath a stack of quarterly earnings statements, almost hidden, she found it. A document, officially stamped with the Sterling Global logo prominently displayed. Its title, bold and stark, seemed to confirm her worst fears. Strategic Philanthropy Initiative, the Sophia Project, maximizing community engagement and brand reputation. The words swam before her eyes, solidifying her conviction that Alexander's motives were not entirely altruistic, that her family's suffering had indeed been, in some twisted way, exploited for his own gain. The paper felt like a death knell in her hands, silencing the last vestiges of hope she had held for Alexander. The document Elena found appeared to show Alexander using her child's condition for a calculated public relations stunt and potential financial leverage. The term, the Sophia Project, echoed in her mind like a chilling prophecy, confirming her worst fears. It wasn't about genuine compassion. It was about maximizing community engagement and brand reputation. Elena felt utterly betrayed, her nascent hope and fragile trust shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The warmth she had begun to feel for Alexander, the belief that he was different, evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, searing anger. How could she have been so foolish, so naive? How could she have allowed herself to be taken in by his carefully constructed facade of concern? Armed with this damning evidence, Eleanor confronted Alexander in his office the very next morning, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound heartbreak. She slammed the document onto his pristine desk, its stark title a cruel mockery of their shared moments. "This is what you call help, Alexander? This is your grand gesture of compassion?" She spat, her eyes blazing with unshed tears. "My daughter's illness, our family's pain, reduced to a project for your corporate image. How could you be so cruel, so utterly devoid of human decency?" Alexander stared at the document, then at Eleanor, his face draining of color. He picked up the paper, his fingers tracing the bold letters of the title. His mind raced, trying to comprehend the accusation, the depth of her pain. "Elena, what is this? This isn't what you think. This is a draft, a proposal from my marketing team, an idea I explicitly rejected." He tried to explain, his words tumbling out in a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm that had suddenly opened between them. "I would never, not in a million years, exploit Sophia's condition for profit or PR. My concern for her, for you, it's real, Elena. It's genuine." But Elena was too consumed by her anger and pain to listen. The words on the page, the carefully chosen corporate jargon, spoke volumes louder than his fervent denials. She saw his shock as feigned, his hurt as a masterful performance. "Rejected. Then why was it on your desk, Alexander? Why was it so carefully hidden?" She challenged, her voice cracking. "I saw the way you looked at us, the way you spoke. I thought you actually cared. But it was all a lie, wasn't it? A calculated move to appear benevolent, to soften your ruthless image." Their devastating showdown unfolded amidst the cold, sterile elegance of his office, each word a shard of glass, cutting deeper into the fragile bond they had begun to forge. Alexander felt a profound sense of injustice, a burning frustration that his true intentions were being so cruelly twisted. He tried to reach for her, to convey the sincerity of his feelings, but she recoiled as if burned. "Elena, please, you have to believe me. This is someone else's doing. Someone trying to drive a wedge between us. This isn't me." Unbeknownst to them, the mysterious antagonist Victoria meticulously orchestrated these events to further drive a wedge between them. She had planted the document, knowing Elena's vulnerability and Alexander's blind spot when it came to office politics. Victoria had observed their growing closeness with a toxic blend of jealousy and strategic calculation. She saw Elena not just as a threat to her own ambitions, but as a potential weakness Alexander could exploit, or worse, be exploited by. Victoria had been quietly feeding Elena misinformation, subtly twisting Alexander's past actions, painting him as a calculating manipulator who only ever acted in his own self-interest. The Strategic Philanthropy Initiative was her masterpiece, designed to hit Elena where it hurt the most, her child. Elena, heartbroken and utterly convinced of Alexander's deception, cut off all ties with him. She refused his calls, ignored his messages, and made it clear through her silence that she wanted nothing more to do with him. Her heart, once again, was a fortress, impenetrable and guarded. She returned to her solitary struggle, the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her with renewed force. She refused his financial assistance, believing it was tainted, a payment for her family's unwitting participation in his corporate charade. She would find another way, she vowed, even if it meant working herself to the bone. Alexander was left reeling, his world turned upside down. The emotional walls he had painstakingly built around himself over the years, walls that Elena had slowly, gently begun to dismantle, now lay completely shattered. He felt a pain he hadn't experienced since the deepest traumas of his past. A profound sense of loss, betrayal, and utter helplessness. Eleanor's accusations, her unwavering conviction that he was a heartless manipulator, stung more than any business defeat. He knew, with an agonizing certainty, that he was innocent of the specific charges, but the depth of her belief in his villainy left him devastated. As the raw pain began to subside, a cold, hard resolve took its place. Alexander sat alone in his office, the Strategic Philanthropy Initiative document still clutched in his hand. He stared at the corporate jargon, the perfectly crafted phrases, and a chilling realization began to dawn. This wasn't a random occurrence. This was too precise, too targeted. The words "the Sophia Project" were specifically designed to wound Elena, to turn her against him. He knew who was capable of such intricate, insidious manipulation. He knew who harbored the intelligence and the ruthlessness to execute such a plan. A name, whispered by his intuition, solidified into a burning conviction. Victoria. His former business partner, now a rival, always lurking in the shadows. He remembered the subtle shifts in office dynamics, the pointed questions, the way she had always seemed to be observing him and Elena. Alexander realized who was behind the manipulation, and a vengeful fire ignited within him. He vowed to expose Victoria, to clear his name, and to reclaim the trust he had so foolishly allowed to be shattered. The game, he decided, was far from over. Alexander, devastated by Elena's rejection, found himself adrift in a sea of despair. The meticulously constructed order of his life, once a source of immense pride, now felt hollow and meaningless. His usual laser-like focus on business began to waver, his decisions lacking the customary precision. Sterling Global, an empire built on his calculated ruthlessness, suffered subtle setbacks, not catastrophic, but noticeable enough to those who watched closely. He pushed his employees harder, his demands sharper, his patience thinner. This renewed ruthlessness, however, was not born of ambition, but of a different, more profound kind of pain, the searing agony of a trust betrayed and a connection severed. It was a self-destructive spiral, a desperate attempt to numb the emotional wound Elena had inflicted, albeit unknowingly. He began to actively investigate the frame-up, his analytical mind, despite its emotional turmoil, seeking patterns and discrepancies. He re-examined every conversation, every email, every seemingly innocuous comment made by Victoria. He pulled archived company files, cross-referencing project timelines with her known movements. He hired a discreet private investigator, not to spy on Elena, but to delve deeper into Victoria's professional history and any potential conflicts of interest. The investigator's findings painted a clearer, more sinister picture. Flashbacks to his past betrayal, a bitter corporate espionage incident years ago that had nearly cost him everything, now made chilling sense. Victoria, his trusted colleague at the time, had been subtly feeding information to a rival firm, orchestrating his near downfall. He had forgiven her, out of a misguided sense of loyalty and a belief in second chances, but the scars remained. Now, he saw the same calculated malice at play, a familiar pattern of insidious manipulation designed to destroy his reputation and, more critically, his burgeoning happiness. The pieces clicked into place, forming a horrifying mosaic of calculated deceit. Meanwhile, Eleanor struggled to cope alone again. The financial burden, momentarily alleviated by Alexander's assistance, now weighed heavily on her shoulders. Her child's health, though stable, remained precarious, a constant source of anxiety that gnawed at her peace of mind. Without Alexander's support, the specialized treatments and medications became an insurmountable challenge once more. She picked up extra shifts, cleaning offices, homes, anything to make ends meet, her body aching, her spirit weary. Yet, amidst the crushing weight of her renewed struggle, a tiny seed of doubt began to sprout. She remembered Alexander's genuine kindness at the hospital, the way he had looked at her child with such tenderness, the raw vulnerability he had shown when he spoke of his own past pain. These memories clashed violently with the image of the cold, calculating CEO painted by the document and Victoria's whispered insinuations. Could she have been so wrong? Was it possible that the evidence, so damning at first glance, had been expertly manufactured? A small, unexpected event further fueled her reconsideration. While cleaning a particularly cluttered office, she stumbled upon a discarded newspaper. An article detailed a new philanthropic initiative launched by Sterling Global, focusing on providing medical aid to underprivileged children. The initiative was spearheaded by Alexander, and the article specifically mentioned his personal commitment, citing anonymous sources who spoke of his profound empathy for children facing severe health challenges. It was a detail that resonated deeply, a stark contrast to the cynical motive she had attributed to him. The article also subtly hinted at recent internal strife within Sterling Global, mentioning the unexpected departure of a senior executive, Victoria Vance, due to irreconcilable differences. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Victoria. The name echoed in her mind, connecting to the very source of her doubt. Alexander, through his relentless investigation, now possessed irrefutable proof of his innocence and Victoria's elaborate deceit. He had uncovered a trail of manipulated documents, forged emails, and secretly recorded conversations that exposed her intricate plot to discredit him and seize control of a significant portion of Sterling Global. Her motive was not just revenge for past grievances, but a desperate attempt to salvage her own failing ventures by sabotaging his. He had the evidence, meticulously gathered, to not only clear his name, but to utterly destroy her career and reputation. The weight of his despair began to lift, replaced by a steely determination. He prepared to expose Victoria, to unleash the full force of his empire against her, to reclaim his integrity, and, perhaps, Elena's trust. He was on the verge of making his move, the final pieces of his strategy falling into place, when a frantic call from the hospital shattered his resolve. Elena's child had taken a sudden, severe turn for the worse. The carefully constructed plan for Victoria's downfall evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming wave of fear and a singular, desperate focus. His path to redemption would have to wait. The sterile white walls of the hospital corridor seemed to press in on Elena, suffocating her with a renewed sense of dread. Her child's small, fragile body lay hooked to a tangle of machines, each beep and whir a cruel reminder of the precarious balance of life. The doctor spoke in hushed, urgent tones, their words a blur of medical jargon that only deepened her panic. The critical need for immediate, specialized treatment was clear, a procedure so advanced, so expensive, it felt utterly unattainable. She felt a familiar, crushing despair settle over her, the weight of her helplessness almost unbearable. In that moment of profound desperation, with all her pride stripped away, she knew there was only one person who could possibly navigate this impossible situation. One person with the resources and influence to make a difference. Despite the lingering tendrils of doubt, despite the pain of their last encounter, Alexander Sterling was her only hope. Alexander, meanwhile, had been preparing for war. His office, usually a sanctuary of order, was scattered with documents, legal briefs, and evidence against Victoria Vance. He had meticulously built his case, each piece of evidence a nail in her coffin. The fury that had driven him since Elena's rejection had coalesced into a cold, precise plan for retribution. He was moments away from launching the public exposure that would dismantle Victoria's life and career when his phone rang. The caller ID flashed the hospital's name, and a cold dread seized him even before he answered. The nurse's voice, tight with urgency, delivered the devastating news. Eleanor's child, his child in all but blood, was in critical condition. All thoughts of revenge, all meticulously crafted strategies against Victoria vanished instantly. His personal vendetta, his wounded pride, meant nothing in the face of this new, terrifying crisis. His love and concern for Elena's child, a bond forged in shared vulnerability and unspoken promises, overrode every other impulse. He didn't hesitate. The man who had been a ruthless CEO just moments before transformed into a whirlwind of focused action. He dropped everything, the meticulously planned downfall of Victoria Vance relegated to a distant, irrelevant concern. His private jet, usually reserved for international business deals, was immediately rerouted. He made calls, his voice sharp and authoritative, cutting through red tape, demanding the best. Top specialists, renowned surgeons, a slot in a cutting-edge clinical trial. He orchestrated it all with a terrifying efficiency born of desperation. He pulled every string imaginable, leveraging every contact, every favor owed, every ounce of his formidable power to secure the best possible medical care. Elena watched him move, a force of nature in the sterile hospital environment. He arrived, not with accusations or demands, but with a quiet, unwavering presence. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he simply acted. He spoke to the doctors, his questions precise and intelligent, grasping the complexities of the child's condition with astonishing speed. He arranged for the child to be airlifted to a specialized facility known for pioneering treatments. A facility so exclusive, so expensive, it was beyond the reach of almost anyone. He sat by the child's bedside, a silent sentinel, his hand often resting gently on the small, feverish forehead. Elena witnessed his unconditional support, his profound, unyielding concern, and in that moment, all her lingering doubts, all the manufactured suspicions, finally dissolved. The image of the manipulative CEO, so carefully constructed by Victoria, shattered completely, replaced by the reality of the man before her, a man who loved her child, unconditionally. Their shared anxiety and hope brought them back together, united by a common, desperate goal. There was no need for words, no need for explanations. The crisis itself was a crucible, burning away the resentment and misunderstanding that had driven them apart. They sat together for hours, their hands often finding each other, a silent testament to the unspoken truth that had always existed between them. In the quiet moments between doctors' updates, as the child fought for every breath, Alexander spoke, his voice low and raw. He didn't just explain, he confessed. He laid bare the full truth of Victoria's manipulation, detailing her intricate plot, her desperate motives, her insidious methods of planting doubt and fabricating evidence. He showed Elena the irrefutable evidence he had gathered, the forged documents, the recorded conversations that painted a clear picture of her deceit. He spoke of his own past, the betrayal that had hardened him, the loss that had made him build walls around his heart. He revealed how Victoria had twisted his own painful history against him, using it as a weapon to poison Elena's perception. Elena listened, her heart aching with a mixture of regret and renewed understanding. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, revealing the cruel tapestry of lies that had almost cost them everything. She saw the depth of his pain, the extent of his sacrifice, and the unwavering strength of his love. The revelation wasn't just about Victoria. It was about Alexander, about the man beneath the empire, the man who had found redemption not through wealth or power, but through an unexpected love that had forced him to confront his deepest wounds. As the child's condition stabilized, a fragile hope began to bloom, not just for the child's recovery, but for the future of their own fractured relationship. The race against time had brought them to the precipice, but it had also stripped away all pretense, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of their connection. The operating room doors swung shut, a stark, clinical boundary separating them from the uncertain fate of the child. Alexander and Elena stood side by side, their hands instinctively finding each other, fingers intertwining in a silent pledge of support. The sterile white walls of the waiting area seemed to press in, amplifying the rhythmic thud of their own anxious hearts. Hours stretched into an eternity, each minute a slow-motion torment. Alexander, ever the strategist, had already orchestrated the child's swift transfer, leveraging every contact, every ounce of his immense influence to secure the finest surgical team available. He had moved mountains, not for profit or power, but for the fragile life of a child he had come to cherish as his own. Elena leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, finding solace in his solid presence, in the quiet strength that radiated from him. The raw honesty of his earlier confession had stripped away the last vestiges of doubt, leaving behind a profound sense of gratitude and a love that had deepened in the face of adversity. When the lead surgeon finally emerged, exhaustion etched on his face, but a hopeful smile playing on his lips, a collective sigh of relief swept through the waiting room. The procedure had been a success. The child was stable, on the long road to recovery, but out of immediate danger. Tears streamed down Elena's face, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy and release. Alexander held her close, his own eyes glistening, a rare display of emotion that spoke volumes of the depth of his feelings. The crisis had passed, leaving in its wake a bond forged in fire, unbreakable and true. With the immediate threat to the child's life averted, Alexander's focus sharpened, turning towards the architect of their pain. Victoria. He had promised Elena justice, and now, with the weight of that promise and the renewed clarity of his purpose, he moved with the precision of a predator. He had meticulously compiled his evidence, the forged documents, the audio recordings of Victoria bribing former employees to spread rumors, the digital footprint of her manipulative emails, even the timeline of her calculated appearances to console Elena while simultaneously poisoning her mind. This was not just about clearing his name. It was about protecting Elena and their newfound family from further harm. The confrontation was public, meticulously planned to ensure maximum impact and irrefutable exposure. Alexander called an emergency press conference, ostensibly to announce a new philanthropic initiative, but with a hidden agenda. As the media gathered, eager for a scoop from the reclusive CEO, Alexander stood before them, not as the ruthless magnate, but as a man wronged, ready to fight for truth. He began by outlining the new medical foundation he was establishing in the child's name, a move that subtly underscored his genuine commitment. Then, with a calm, measured tone that belied the fury churning within him, he systematically dismantled Victoria's web of lies. He presented the evidence, projected onto a large screen for all to see, each piece a nail in her carefully constructed coffin of deceit. The room buzzed with gasps and murmurs as the extent of Victoria's treachery was laid bare. Her motives, rooted in a desperate attempt to reclaim a past relationship and sabotage Alexander's new happiness, were exposed for the petty, vindictive acts they were. Victoria, watching the broadcast from her luxurious apartment, saw her world crumble. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Her reputation, once pristine, was shredded, her career irrevocably ruined. The downfall was dramatic and complete, a swift and decisive end to her reign of manipulation. Eleanor, watching from the hospital room with her recovering child, felt a surge of strength and pride. She knew then that she had to stand by him, not just in their private moments, but publicly, unequivocally. Later that day she joined Alexander, her presence a silent, powerful affirmation of her belief in him. She spoke briefly, her voice clear and resonant, recounting her initial doubts and how Alexander's actions had ultimately revealed his true character. Her words carried more weight than any legal document, a testament to his integrity. The child's successful recovery brought immense relief and joy, a vibrant symbol of hope after the storm. Alexander and Elena shared a moment of profound connection, sitting by the child's bedside, their hands clasped, their eyes meeting in a silent understanding. The love they felt for each other, for this precious child, was undeniable, a powerful force that had overcome every obstacle. Alexander, having cleared his name and secured justice, looked at Elena, his heart overflowing. He knew, with absolute certainty, that his life had irrevocably changed. This woman, this child, had shown him a world beyond boardrooms and balance sheets, a world of genuine connection and unconditional love. He took a deep breath, the words forming on his lips, a question that would redefine their future. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box, his gaze unwavering as he met her eyes. Alexander knelt beside Elena, the small velvet box open, revealing a diamond that shimmered with the promise of a shared future. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now held a warmth and vulnerability she had never imagined possible. "Eleanor," he began, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hand, "you have shown me what it means to truly live, to truly love. You and your child have brought light into a life I thought was destined for perpetual darkness. Marry me. Let us build a future together, a real family." Elena's breath hitched, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't just the shock of the proposal or the beauty of the ring. It was the profound sincerity in his gaze, the unvarnished truth of his words. She had seen him at his most vulnerable, his most desperate, and now at his most hopeful. This proposal was not born of pity or obligation, but from a love that had blossomed amidst adversity, forged in the fires of betrayal and redemption. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. 1,000 times, yes, Alexander." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and then pulled her into a tender embrace, a silent promise of forever echoing in the quiet hospital room. Their wedding was a stark contrast to the sterile opulence Alexander had once embraced. It was an intimate affair, held in a sun-drenched garden, filled with laughter and genuine warmth. Close friends, including a few trusted colleagues who had witnessed Alexander's transformation, and Elena's small but loving circle, gathered to celebrate their union. The air was thick with joy, a tangible sense of new beginnings. Alexander, in a custom-tailored suit that softened his formidable presence, looked at Elena, radiant in a simple, elegant gown, and knew that every struggle, every heartbreak, had led him to this moment. Elena's child, now fully recovered and beaming, served as the cutest ring-bearer, a living testament to the love that had brought them together. Their new life unfolded like a beautifully written story, each chapter richer than the last. Alexander's empire, sterling global, once a monument to his ruthless ambition, began to transform. Inspired by Elena's unwavering compassion and the ordeal they had faced, he shifted the company's focus towards sustainable practices and philanthropic initiatives, particularly in healthcare. The medical foundation he had initially established for Elena's child flourished, becoming a beacon of hope for countless families facing similar struggles. Alexander, once the epitome of the detached CEO, now found profound satisfaction in using his vast resources for the greater good, a testament to the quiet influence of the woman he loved. Elena, no longer a cleaning lady struggling to survive, embraced her new role with grace and purpose. She became actively involved in the foundation, her personal experience lending a powerful voice to their mission. She thrived in her new life, not defined by wealth, but by the love and stability she had found. Her child, growing stronger and more vibrant each day, was a constant source of joy, a playful reminder of the miraculous journey they had undertaken. The laughter that now filled their grand home was a melody Alexander had never known he craved, a symphony of family and belonging. The lingering conflicts and past traumas that had haunted Alexander for so long finally began to heal. The memory of his past betrayal no longer held the same power, eclipsed by the profound love and trust he now shared with Elena. He found peace in the quiet moments, watching Elena read to their child, or simply sharing a cup of coffee as the sun rose over their home. He had shed the skin of the ruthless CEO, emerging as a man who understood that true power lay not in accumulation, but in connection, in compassion, and in the unwavering strength of family. Their blended family, a testament to resilience and hope, often spent weekends at a secluded lakeside cabin, far from the bustling city. It was there, amidst the tranquility of nature, that Alexander truly found himself. He would watch Eleanor and their child playing by the water. Their laughter carried on the breeze, and a profound sense of fulfillment would wash over him. He had once believed his life's purpose was to conquer the world, to build an unassailable empire. But now he knew his greatest achievement was the family he had built, the love he had found. In the end, the millionaire CEO, Alexander Sterling, discovered that true wealth was not measured in billions or market shares, but in the warmth of a loving embrace, the laughter of a child, and the unwavering companionship of a soulmate. He had found not just love, but a true family, proving that even the most hardened hearts could be softened by compassion and truth. His journey, from the sterile isolation of his empire to the vibrant embrace of a new dawn, was a powerful testament to the transformative power of human connection. A quiet revolution sparked by a cleaning lady sleeping on a toilet, and the extraordinary love that bloomed in the most unexpected of places. Their future stretched before them, bright and full of promise, a testament to a love story that defied all expectations.